Do you talk openly about money with your children at the dinner table? We're taught that money is a private matter. Don't talk about politics, religion, or your net worth, especially with our children. We hide the numbers thinking we're protecting them from entitlement or burden. But in the corporate world, hiding the P&L from the board of directors would be a fireable offense. According to a TR Price survey, 71% of parents said they would rather talk to their kids about drugs, smoking, or death than talk about family finances. If you are building generational wealth, your children are the future CEOs of your legacy. So why are we treating them like the interns? Today on Escape the Clock, I'm speaking with the author of the new book, Thinking for Success, 52 Stories that Upgrade Your Thinking to Boost Productivity, Problem Solving, and Relationships. He challenges the traditional ways we manage our family fortunes. So stay tuned for an eye-opening conversation that may change the way you think about your legacy going forward. Welcome back to Escape the Clock, the show where we highlight strategies for achieving financial freedom and having the option not to work. I'm your host, Daniel C. Rogers. One of the biggest risks in any long-term project is succession planning. In the wealth world, there's a famous saying, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The first generation makes it, the second spins it, and the third blows it. Research from the Williams Group found that 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the second generation and 90% lose it by the third. Even the wealthiest suffer from this problem, spending lavishly on off-site family retreats where professional companies help them design a legacy that lasts. Why does that continue to be such a problem for so many? We all understand that we're supposed to name the beneficiaries and transfer the assets, but we rarely transfer the framework that led to our success. We toil, save, and sacrifice, all to earn a comfortable life for our older selves and for our families. Yet so many stumble at the finish line when it comes to legacy planning. Not because of any lack of intelligence or willpower, but simply because the way we are taught to behave with money prevents us from setting up our inheritors for success. It's taboo to talk about the family's financial situation and operations at the dinner table. So instead, adults find themselves speaking about it in hushes in back rooms when the kids are asleep. We find that we are helping protect them, but indirectly all we're doing is hiding the knowledge and the tools they will eventually need to learn for themselves. So let me ask you this. Is a legacy of money inheritance, without governance, a legacy at all? Well, today my guest says he has engineered a solution to that problem. John Knowlton co-founded a wealth management firm that grew to manage over $1 billion in assets. He sold it in 2020 and retired at the age of 51, but instead of just going golfing, he treated his family's future like a business turnaround. He established a family board, complete with voting rights, investment committees, and a governance charter that includes his adult children. He's also the author of the newly released book, Thinking for Success, which outlines 52 mental models for better decision-making. John, welcome to Escape the Clock.
Daniel, it's a real pleasure to be here with you and your listeners and viewers.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed going through your book. I want to start, though, with what led you to deciding to spend your time in the way you are. Like I said, you made it. You had that career. You got to that retirement. You had been spending your career managing billions of dollars for other families. When you sold your firm and you looked at your own family, what was the thing that you were seeing and what were you trying to avoid?
Well, that is a key question, really. Like, what am I here for and how am I going to spend my time? And really everyone needs to grapple with that. And I guess maybe when you start your career, you've got these pressing needs of, gosh, I've got to pay rent or pay a mortgage and pay off my student loans. And so there's kind of this boulder chasing you down the hill that you're running to stay in front of. But at some point, especially for those of us who are able to retire early, then we're faced with these questions. Gosh, how do I spend the next half of my life or however much time I have left? And the book, Thinking for Success, lays out my definition of success. And it is really like this. It's becoming ever more like the person you were designed to be. And there's this term from geometry called an asymptote, which is a curve that approaches a line but never touches it. So I could say walk halfway to the wall and walk halfway again, walk halfway again. You could keep getting closer, but never quite get there. And so I think it's incumbent on everyone to really discern what is the thing that I'm uniquely created for or skilled or designed for, and then lean into that. And so that led me in 2021 on a sabbatical. I took an indefinite sabbatical, and there was some deferred maintenance on my house and projects like this. But really, it was a spending time with my wife and in quiet prayer and solitude. What am I doing with the next half of my life? And I stumbled into this thing called C12, which is peer advisory for Christian CEOs and business owners. So for the last few years, I've been leading a couple of groups of people in that category, as well as leaning into my family. And so we really want our family to maintain a sense of identity and be a force for good for generations.
I was going through the book and I really enjoyed a lot of the balanced but positive messaging. You're kind of positioning who we are in this journey we all take. I also love the selflessness of how you turn a lot of that to wanting to help your family and a broader kind of people that we touch in our lives. And so I want to dive into one of the questions you ask in the book. At one point you say, you really tell your kids how much you make? And you kind of just pose this question, like, do you really do it? Because that's like the crux of so much, I think, that a lot of us struggle with. There was a study by Merrill Lynch that found that 52% of parents have never had a comprehensive conversation with their adult children about their net worth, inheritance plans, or anything around that. So there is a large lack of conversations when it comes to something that is so important in so many of our lives. And I think it's not like there's bad intention behind there. I think there's a fear of spoiling kids that will drive a lot of us to silence. So in your book, you argue that authority without information is blind. Why does withholding financial data essentially set them up to fail when they eventually get that inheritance?
Yeah, the short answer to your question, or my question that I posed, is yes, we open the kimono. In fact, we were having a family meeting at the end of December. Here we're recording in mid-December, and the slides needed to be updated on how much money did I make this in 2024. I guess I was using my last tax return, and what's our current net worth. So updating from the previous discussions. And so, I mean, I keep an Excel chart and we graph it and I share it with them. Absolutely. Now, you can't just dump that on somebody. There has to be some context for them. And so the context begins at the dinner table when they're little. And my wife and I have practiced the 4 questions since the beginning of our marriage. And the 4 questions are these, Daniel. How was your day? How was your day? What do you need tonight? What do you need tonight? It's really just 2 questions. You only have to remember 2. How was your day? What do you need? And the how was your day question gives you the opportunity to talk about how did you interact in the world today? Who did you talk to? What value did you provide? What services did you provide? How did you help a client? How did you talk to an employee? So you're really telling your kids, how do I interact in the world? And how do I function as a person? And they're also learning, how do loving parents talk to each other? How do spouses treat each other? What are the expectations that I should have if I'm a girl of my husband, or if I'm a boy of my wife? And so all of the financial education begins right there at the dinner table, kneecap to kneecap, listening to how are we interacting in the world. So I didn't share with my little kids about detailed financial information, but hey, I'm contemplating building an office building. Here's what I'm thinking about with my partner, Mr. Kehoe, and things like that. And so they would learn through observing our interactions and listening to our conversations. And then as they got a little older, if I was going to buy or sell a business or do some kind of a deal, a real estate transaction, I'd bring my kids with me. My little son, Sam, was my briefcase. He was my bag man. He had my briefcase at a closing, and I don't know, we put a $150,000 check in it, and he got to carry it to the bank, to deposit the check, things like that. So yes, we're completely open and transparent with our money, and you have to have some context for it, I think.
Yeah, I can imagine because you brought your kids along on the journey and you made it such a norm to talk about these things that you didn't have to do too much awkward pushing of specific conversations at specific age points is kind of what how I'd imagine it, at least. How would you advise a parent who hasn't been doing this, who's just not been talking to their kids about this, but who wants to start? Is there some mental model you would point them to for that?
Yeah, it's interesting question. I've asked a number of people. I don't ask them why they don't talk about money with their kids because that's maybe a little too intense for people. But why do you think people don't talk about money with their kids? And the number one reason that I get is shame. They think people feel shameful about decisions they've made, debt they've taken on, things like this. And I would just say, here's the mental model, if you will. Some people say experience is the best teacher, but I would say someone else's experience is the best teacher. Because if I can only learn from my experience, well, that means I've got to stub my toe an awful lot. But if I can learn from Daniel, hey, there's a rock around the corner here, don't stub your toe on it. Boy, that would be a whole lot better. And so whether your financial picture is awesome or rotten or most likely somewhere in between, I would just encourage you to begin to share, even if you don't share numbers, share your experiences. Oh man, I took out credit card debt when I was in college and it took me years to pay it off. Avoid that stuff like the plague or whatever, but begin to share that stuff. And people are impressed with your success, but they're impacted by your failures. And so if you can share with your family, hey, here's a mistake I made. I sure hope you don't do that. And here's how I would do it better if I had a chance to go back.
That's right. Because from experience, if you start with data and spreadsheets and stuff, it just, especially with a young person, their eyes will glaze over. But if you talk about stories, everyone on some level can connect with a good story, and it can be a very effective way. And it's not like it's easy to talk about the mistakes that we've made and talk about those stories. But when you're coming from a place of love and someone can hear that, yeah, you could move them in the right direction for sure. Well, I want to touch on something that's very unique that I think you do that maybe a lot of us should start considering, which is this idea of a family board. And I was hoping you could walk us through what that is, the actual mechanics of it, and how it's kind of different from like just a normal family meeting, which is probably what a lot of us do.
Yeah, and I actually want to back up and start with Simon Sinek's golden triangle. Start with why. Why do we want to do this? And so for me, I've already shared it, but the why is I want a family to maintain its identity and be a force for good for generations, rather than every nuclear family starting the cycle over. Hey, let's start not at our own goal line, but let's start somewhere down the field a ways here. So that's the why. How is the next thing. And this is what I think I'm bringing to the conversation that might be a little bit unique. And the how is what I call shared governance. And we can unpack that as we continue talking. And then the what is the assets, the money, investments, portfolio, real estate, family business, etc. So why, how, what? Why? To make my family persist and be a force for good. How? Shared governance. And so one of the mechanisms of shared governance is the family meeting or the board meeting. And the idea here, Daniel, is contrast with traditional estate planning. Very commonly in estate planning, a family that has some assets will write a trust document that has pretty specific language around when distributions can be made. There might be age requirements. There might even be behavioral requirements. So essentially, we're trying to codify our values in this document and then govern from the grave. The attorneys talk about it, or control from the grave. And I think that's way, way, way too late. In other words, if we want to impart good decision-making and teach our values and see those things persist, we need to be living them together with our kids long before we die. And so shared governance is what it sounds like. We share the role, the decision-making with our kids. And so my wife and I have taken our adult kids through an extensive process of discerning our family's mission and vision and values. And we've set up a governing structure with a family board. And then there are two committees. One is a philanthropy committee and one is an investment committee. And so I'll just give you an example. The board says, hey, we want to give away this much money this year. Okay, great. The investment committee needs to respond to that by making sure we generate enough cash in order to satisfy the goal. And then the philanthropy committee needs to respond to that by identifying giving opportunities that are in line with our family's mission and vision and values. And so we're all working together, with our own areas of specialization, but together towards the goals to meet the objectives that we've together set as a board. So feel free to ask more details.
Awesome. I got a round of lightning questions for you on all this.
Okay.
I think it's a fascinating model, and I'm sure a lot of people will be having some thoughts tickling their brain here. So the first is your family governance charter. Can you talk about what like the top 2 or 3 kind of critical rules were for you in that document?
Well, who's on the board? That's one thing. And so we've decided on a 5-person board. And so we're actually keeping a running list of family members. My kids are engaged. So in 2026, we're going to add a couple of people and to the family, but not necessarily to the board. And so we've decided on 5. It's good to have a tiebreaker number, if you will. So that was the first thing, is who's going to be in the decision-making process. And then we've had to go through, how does one get on the board? So we just started with the people we had, but what we've decided is that board should be made up of the chairs of the 2 committees, philanthropy and investment committee, and that you enter a committee, and then by spending time on that committee, you can then learn enough through the work of giving money away or investing money. You sort of learn through that process and then could become a member of the board. So we're using the committees as sort of workshops or places where people can learn how to manage the money according to the family's approach and values.
So a lot of people think about investment before philanthropy. And I'm not arguing that's right or wrong, but do you see either direct strategy, if you will, or maybe a natural outcome where some of the family members are sitting on an investment committee learning how to grow money and use money responsibly before going to the philanthropy committee? Or maybe you're doing it the other way around, or maybe it doesn't matter. Like, how have you seen members come and go between these committees?
Yeah. In my family, they're much more inclined to be on the philanthropy committee than the investment committee. Dad's been doing this for 40 years. I started investing at age 11 and I'm 56. So I think they're intimidated by trying to get up to speed with me or something. I don't know. But one of my goals for this meeting that's coming up is to add another member to the investment committee. So maybe you and I are more inclined to think about investing, but for my kids and my family, they've seen us tithe, and we've been committed tithers our entire marriage. So that's natural for them. And as they got allowances, they were taught to tithe. We give at least 10%, the first 10% away, and then we may give above and beyond that. So it could be different in different families.
It sounds like they're happy for dad to make the money and then they can help give it away.
That might be true. That's a concern of mine. I'm very gratified. One of my daughters is getting her MBA right now. And when she was in one of the tough finance in intro finance, but master's level, she was struggling with all these formulas and the finance class. There's a lot to it.
Yeah, I'm taking them. Yep.
And I think her professor was very data oriented and not super relational or whatever. And she said, do I really need to know these kinds of things? And I said, well, here. And I pulled up a 3-tab real estate deal analysis spreadsheet that I use. And I'm like, kinda, yeah. And so she knuckled down and she came over and wanted to help. I helped her prep for her exam and whatnot. But so I'm gratified. She's learning that. I've got another son who's running a general contracting company, and he's starting to think like a business person. And so with my help, I sit on his staff meetings and help guide discussions. So they're learning. It makes me happy.
Well, a lot of the way I look at it is we have to help push enough information to help them avoid making costly mistakes, and then wait for them to come back to us when they're ready to learn some of the bigger picture stuff. At least that's the way I've been experiencing it so far. But then again, my kids aren't fully adults yet, so they're still going.
Well, and I've seen your spreadsheet, your planning tool. So I know you could get down into some Excel, man.
Yeah, I get a little thorough and I like data. Anyone's listening to the show probably can tell that at this point. But yeah, imagining at least one of them at some point is going to want to dive deep into some data, and I'll have plenty for them.
Cool.
I am curious about how often you all meet. Like, how formally do you do that? Is this a dinner table conversation? Are you actually sitting in a meeting room somewhere? What's the environment look like?
Yeah, so our end of the year meeting is going to be in person in Florida. We live in Michigan and soon to be Colorado and Oregon. And so we're spread across time zones. So most of our meetings are 75 minutes on Zoom. So we found that to be the right amount of time. People can stay engaged for that long. And the meeting cadence is approximately 6 meetings a year. The philanthropy committee has decided that they can make decisions via email. In other words, if someone has a gift or a bequest or idea, there's a form they fill out. And I'm very proud of my daughter who built this form to ensure that it asks the questions about how does this entity measure results? How do their activities align with our mission, vision, values, et cetera. And so there's pretty much all the information you could need to make a decision contained in the form. So they can work asynchronously. But as a group, we tend to get together every couple of months on a Saturday morning.
Gotcha. And how have these gone so far? Have there been any contentious ones? And also, have there been any moments where maybe an individual or a committee has come and brought something that just is not really, in your mind, been a great idea? And how did those things play out? Like, for instance, maybe pushing for a meme stock or something. And you're like, well, no, my experience tells me that's not a good investment. And, being the chair of the investment committee, I mean, I imagine you might have some power to override ideas like that. Have you had situations like that pop up?
Yeah, as I said, I'd love to have that on the investment committee. They're not. But I'll tell you, for example, I was looking at buying a building that had 4 retail shops and then I think 18 residential units. So it was a 3-story building. And my older daughter, who lives in the same town, came on a walkthrough and began to, ask questions. We went over the pro forma and the cash flow analysis and all that on the deal. And she met with a couple of guys who were considering a joint venture with us. And so they're getting exposed there. Your question was about contention. So far, we have not. So it's so far just been a pretty tight group that's fairly homogeneous.
That's great. Well, I imagine some folks, if they try this, they might not always have the most harmonious situation. But I think the important thing is stay focused on your mission statement and, keep looking at the bigger picture. I would love to ask you about how you see setting up your children as successors. Because I know it sounds like some of them are adults, but, there's a model here that you have in mind. Actually, you have lots of models in mind as I look through your book. In particular, you had a model called the push work down, pull work down, where leaders delegate tasks to the lowest competent level, which I think anyone who's worked in corporations are going to feel very familiar with this. How do you apply this to training your heirs? Are you pushing work down to your children so that they're building confidence before it's too late? Is that kind of how the way you think of it?
Well, it certainly is. Yeah. So we think about the family wealth as belonging to the family and not to individuals. We're actually in the process of setting up a family LLC, which can be the sort of holding company, if you will, for real estate brokerage accounts, et cetera. And then we would have membership interests in the LLC rather than having assets titled in our own names. And then other business entities can also be members of that family LLC. LLCs are governed by particular state laws, so I'm not giving legal advice or anything like that, and check with a local competent attorney in your jurisdiction. But yes, so the short answer is we really want kids to get on board with making decisions jointly. And that's the whole point of sharing the governance. And as their competence and experience grows, my intention is that my wife and I can begin to be second chair instead of first chair. And ultimately, I expect I'll be spending more time with grandchildren than children and mentoring them, in all the ways that good grandparents would, in addition to mentoring them into the idea that they have a duty to be a productive member of this family. Now, the family wealth that we have is not intended to support the lifestyles of anybody in the family. So one of our core values is self-reliance, and that each of us has a profession or a career of some kind. I mentioned one daughter's getting her MBA. She works for a university right now. Her fiance is a medical doctor. My son runs a general contracting company. He has this grand vision for his company. And so he's going to be doing just fine. Right now, he's partnering with the family, though. We're buying properties that can use value add. His company adds the value. Together, we sell it and share profits, the family and his company. So each of them should learn to be self-reliant. And so that's a way of building skills along the way as well. But they've got a friendly backstop of the family. So we're there to teach, to guide, to give or lend money, expertise, etc. But they're responsible for their own living expenses and their own family's expenses. And the family money is for posterity.
So when your children were to get married, is their significant others and eventually children and all that stuff also included in the board? And maybe not the board, but at least the committees? Is there a vetting period that you typically look at? How do you extend it so it's outside of your immediate family?
I'm young enough and new enough at this that we haven't had to worry about divorces or the third generation yet. That we're contemplating all that, and it's actually on our discussion list for this year. But yes, we do invite the committed fiancés into the discussion. I think it's important for them to know what their spouse is committed to, which is our family, and to be clear, don't expect to be enriched when John and Julie die. You have the skills and abilities to earn your living. It's not coming from the family money. That is to be a force for good for generations.
Gotcha. And has there ever been a moment where you've had to reject any ideas, or have you found that the family typically is usually coming together and finding ways to compromise and always move forward? Or have you been to the point yet where you've had to make a hard rejection on something?
Yeah. So raising your kids and being an involved parent, you tend to transfer most of your values. But I will say there are some values differences across the generations around social issues. Younger people tend to be a little more liberal around certain issues than older people, right? It's not universally true, but we do have some differences there. And so we've worked to craft our values in ways that address our commonality and not our differences.
A lot of folks listening to this show are chasing financial independence. So, they're looking at trying to get to maybe a number or a certain milestone in their lives where work becomes optional. And I think a lot of us, when we think of things like succession planning, I won't speak for everyone, but at least for me, it was part of a checklist thing. I wanted to make sure I had covered my bases. I wasn't going to have done all this work and then just squandered it and not prepared my family well. I'm just curious, as you've gone through all of this, there was one of the other models in your book. You talked about there's such a thing as a bad success.
Mm-hmm. Good success and bad success.
Yeah, bad success. And I don't think any of us are purposely working for that, but you never know, right? Until you get to an outcome. But I was curious how implementing all of this, the family board and all of your ideas, and I know it's growing, but I can see that it's had a very positive impact on you since your retirement. How has this changed your own sense of purpose in your own life?
Well, it really has. An unexpected outcome, Daniel, is that as we're talking more openly and clearly about money and making it and giving it, it's actually changed how we talk about everything else. So as we're more open about money, and it's interesting, we call it earning a living, right? It's part of our life. It's maybe our life distilled into a balance sheet. As we talk more openly and clearly about that, it has given us the opportunity to talk more openly and clearly about other things that are important to us, our relationships, our personal struggles and things like this. And so I wasn't even aware that would happen. but it's been a beautiful, unintended positive outcome or side effect of that. And so thinking about good success and bad success, I think having more money without better relationships wouldn't be a good success. In other words, Stephen Covey's language, that would be leaning the ladder up against a tall wall, but it was the wrong wall. I'd rather be poor and have great relationships with my kids. Even better, I'd rather be rich and have great relationships with my kids.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's powerful. I mean, I've definitely heard folks say, wow, if I only had this much more money, then everything would be okay. But I know for a fact that once you get to that special number that you pick, it's never enough. It doesn't automatically fix your problem. So that's amazing that you've experienced these other things in your life, that you've created a conduit for social connection and relationship building. That's not just around the money. It's about the people. Because in the book, I talk about the 5 big regrets people have at the end of their retirement. And usually one of them is they didn't spend more time on relationships. They spent too much time chasing wealth.
Yeah.
So I think, some people are probably going to be listening to this and be interested in the book. They're going to be interested in thinking about, how do I try this? So 2 quick questions. One, for someone who might not have a ton of money, I don't know what the number is, but let's just say they're not even to $1 million. They're working their way up and might feel like they're not quite rich enough for a board. Are they wrong? Should they be doing this now? Or is it better to wait until you have more assets to manage? And then the second part of the question is, what's the first step they should take if they should?
Sure. Well, I would say that it's important to be open with your kids about your life. Like I said earlier, even if you'd made a mess of things, let them know about the messes so they can avoid those, making the mistakes that led to the mess. And so I'm just highly encouraging of people to be open and clear. Secrecy doesn't lead to good things. So that's my first step is, hey, let's be clear and honest with our kids. Age appropriate, of course. Little kids shouldn't be worrying about money. They shouldn't have you. That's an adult responsibility, is to make sure that we have food, shelter, and all of that. So don't put that on your kids. But if they're old enough to have a job, they're old enough to know about money and how you make it and how you spend it and how you think about it. So I think that's appropriate, whether you're dirt poor or fabulously wealthy or anywhere in between. I think it's great to work your way into this. So you could think about, if you don't have a whole bunch of money yet, you still have the ability to make some gifts, to do some giving. And you could invite your kids to make decisions about, hey, we were thinking about the Salvation Army or the Humane Society or the Girl Scouts, whatever. What do you think we should do and why? And now you're starting a values discussion. If they choose Girl Scouts, oh, great. Why the Girl Scouts? And you get to hear from them, and then you can share your heart about it. I just think that's a beautiful conversation. And then you could say it's time for open enrollment. And it made me think about changing my 401k contribution. Hey, kids, you're a little older. You understand how math works. I was thinking about saving more money in my 401k. That will mean we have a little bit less for vacations or going out to eat or what have you. Let's talk about this trade-off and invite them into a conversation that way. So that's not, you don't have to set up a board, but you can begin to have conversations that provoke your kids and draw them in to thinking like an adult about trade-offs and about money and about their values.
That's amazing. Yeah. So you I guess it's not too early or too late to start thinking about those dinner table conversation as little boardrooms until you get to the point where you're ready to start crafting your governance statements and then forming your own little committees, whatever your committees are right for your family.
Sure. So Daniel, I'm trying something new at this year's in-person family board meeting. So my dad was a teacher. My mom stayed home with the boys until we went to school, had some different corporate jobs. And then together they ran an insurance agency. And then I became their financial advisor and helped them sell their business and then manage their assets until I retired. And I haven't even told them that we do this with our kids. And I just realized that was a miss. I missed that opportunity to mentor up.
Yeah.
Not that I'm asking them to do the same with me and my brother, but just for them to hear. As I said, our relationships seem to be getting better as we talk more openly. And so they're invited to our family board meeting this year.
It's amazing to imagine the growth that we all have. Even those who established this, we are still growing. It doesn't end. So that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, John, for being here with us today. How can listeners connect with you and get your book? Thank you for success.
Daniel, you're a great host and interviewer. And so I've honestly loved this conversation. And so the book is called Thinking for Success. And the subtitle is 52 Stories That Upgrade Your Thinking to Boost Productivity, Problem Solving, and Relationships. You can get the book anywhere books are sold, and you can go to our website, thinkingforsuccess.com, and there's an Insights tab that has lots of short videos and pieces of articles that I've written that are just additional conversations around how do we manage our family, how do we manage our relationships. The favorite one seems to be the ones with my wife. I'm sure she's more attractive than I am, and so you can see some with just me and some with Julie as well.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you being here on the show today and helping us think about our families and financial literacy and succession a little differently. I think it's been useful for me. I definitely have a lot of new ideas after we talked about this and after looking at your book. So thanks again for coming on the show.
True pleasure. Thanks, Daniel.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with John Knowlton. There were a lot of insightful things he shared in his non-conventional approach to family finances. For example, the profound distinction between good success and bad success. Because it's natural to want the best for our loved ones, but good intentions can result in bad outcomes. But like John said, the best teacher is someone else's experiences. We can use that model to ensure that we're avoiding those sharp rocks and enjoying the walk. John said that authority without information is blind. And as parents, we have the authority, and it can be all too easy to lecture and correct, yet it's hard to learn without the information. Our children might listen to us, but without context, they're blindly wandering forward, especially after we're gone. But like John said, stories are one of the most effective ways to teach. They're easier to listen to, and they're easier to remember. And what better place to tell stories than the kitchen dinner table? Yet the data shows that 52% of parents have never had a comprehensive conversation about wealth or legacy with their children. Sadly, the norm is to hand the next generation the keys to the kingdom without teaching them how to govern it. John's book, Thinking for Success, goes deep into the mental models to take on these mental challenges. His proposal to stop treating our wealth like a secret and start treating it like a business gives us a familiar blueprint. It starts with the golden triangle. It's a simple exercise. You define the why, the how, and the what. The why defines your values on paper. This is your mission statement and the thing that can keep you all on the same page and anchored throughout the twists and turns of life. The how is what it sounds like. This is how you'll govern. John touched on a few things that worked for his family. First, they created a Family LLC, placing assets into a shared entity. This allowed them to shift the psychology away from individual interest and into the common shared interests of the family, which takes us to the other piece, their shared governance model. All members are decision makers, and everyone has a role. They have committees, and they have a board, but this is just the constructs that bring them together and keep them united in purpose. The governance model gives them the tools: voting, debating, growing. Whatever they need to continue to be a positive family force toward their why. And finally, there's the what. This is what most of us think about when it comes to financial freedom. Get more assets, grow the net worth. But did you notice how John downplayed this part of the triangle? The money isn't the important part. It's a means to an end. And in his case, how much giving him and his family can do. Look, you don't need a boardroom or millions of dollars to add governance to your life. All you need is the intent and a shared space. You could start at a dinner table and bring up the values important to you and your hopes for your family's future. With older kids can come more mature conversations, but it's not too early or too late to start the conversation. For example, John shared his decision to bring his kids into his 401k choice during their open enrollment. In my entire lifetime, it had never once occurred to me that I might ever do this. But why not? My kids will need to make that decision, Wouldn't it have been better if they had had a safe place to practice it? They could have asked me questions. They could have seen what the impact of my decision would be. And maybe later they'd have some understanding about why we're making a sacrifice or doing something that we were doing. This is financial literacy in action. So the challenge for us this week is to break that 52% statistic. Whether you're setting up a family LLC or just asking your kids, what do you need? I'd love to hear from you. How do you plan to talk to your family about money this week? Would you consider using a formal governance model? Send me an email at contact@escapetheclock.com or leave your comment where you listen. I'm Daniel C. Rogers. Thanks for listening. Best of luck governing your family finances and escaping the clock. I'll catch you next week. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Remember, while I'm not yet a financial planner, I am getting my degree in wealth management. You should take anything you've heard here as tips and advice to making your plan. To learn more, visit www.escapetheclock.com. There, you can find the book, resources, including the planner, and you can even schedule time with me. Please remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.